Hey there, I want to mention two quick things before we start today's show. First up, if you're a supporter of Light Pollution News, awesome, thank you. You will be invited to a live audience participation for our next recording of the show. So be on the lookout for an email from me, bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Second, I'll be including a poll at the end of today's show. You can text a response yes or no simply by following a link that's in the show notes of your podcast player. And that text is free of charge. Okay, let's kick off another Light Pollution News. Light Pollution News, June 2024, crap lighting. Boy, do we have a great show for you today. A wonderful panel of guests, including lawyer Yana Yakushina from Buglife, Mr. David Smith, and the dark sky officer for Cumbria, England, Mr. Jack Ellerby. This month, how did animals fare during the solar eclipse? Are indicator lights making your nights extra bright? And a marvelously devious scheme to power solar energy 24 hours a day. All this and much more coming up next. Welcome to Light Pollution News, the monthly podcast where we talk about the month's news as it pertains to the relatively catch-all topic of light pollution. Light Pollution News is first and foremost a discussion where we aim to not just keep you up to date on news, but facilitate conversation around the topics affecting light pollution. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, and I'm quite thrilled to have a slate of guests with me today. You guys are in for a real treat. First up, joining us is David Smith, the Social Change and Advocacy Officer at Buglife. For you at home who may not be familiar with Buglife, it's essentially an insect conservation trust. We had some articles featuring Buglife in the past. David works to help reduce pollutants of all kinds that may affect invertebrates, not the least of which includes light pollution. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be here.
Next up, and I was originally forwarded your name from past guest Bill Green of the Philly Movement, now the Brussels Lunatics. Bill reached out and said, hey, you have to connect with Yana. She's got to be a future guest. So I want to welcome Yana Yakushina to the show for the first time. Yana is no stranger to the space. Yana is a lawyer who has collaborated with the EU Commission, Dark Sky International, and the International Astronomical Union. Yana is currently working on a PhD over at the University of Ghent, where Yana is crafting a legal framework for recognizing light pollution as a critical environmental concern. Yana, very excited to have you on today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Yeah, I believe I had Bill on, I think it was last summer, and at the time he was doing sidewalk astronomy over in Brussels. And now I see what you're trying to do, and I see what he does, and he's lighting engineer and working in that space. You guys both are in one of the brightest countries in Europe, right? What's the reception been to the concept of light pollution in a country that's so immersed in light?
I mean, first of all, I met Bill 3 years ago, I think. And most of the Belgians just don't know that light pollution is a problem. But during the last years, we can see the switch. The governmental switch, the European Commission and authorities started to think about it as an issue. But what Bill does, and we organize many workshops around Belgium to raise awareness to public, actually, that it's an issue. But yeah, it's growing. It's a very slow process.
Yeah, it's a very slow process. I guess it's one by one, right? It's not. And have you seen positive feedback from people, or has it been skeptical feedback?
If you talk to general public, the feedback is generally positive. Even if people have concerns about safety, we were able to explain that it's about the better lighting, not the complete cutoff of the lighting. So then the response is always positive. With authorities, it's kind of the same issue, but you're still able to explain how to balance this situation. The biggest problem we had, I think, is when we're talking to industry.
What's the industry's concern?
Industry, like lighting industry or electrical companies who are responsible, for example, in Belgium specifically, for installing public lighting, they always they don't consider it as an issue at all. Like, they don't believe it's an issue. And I think they should be the main target audience for workshops and explaining why it's actually we should change the lighting. Their main concern that the new LEDs are actually good because they're energy efficient, but we're always trying to explain that the energy efficiency is not the only issue of light pollution. So,
right. Yeah, I guess it's trying to explain to Dow Chemical how certain pesticides are not great for the environment, but a little bit on that side. Okay, finally, we have a man with us tonight who's literally convinced people to actually turn off the lights, walk outside, and look up. Side note, it's always in that order, right? Right, Jack? It seems that most people walk inside, close the shade, then turn the lights on. I want to welcome Jack Ellerby to Light Pollution News. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Bill, for having me.
Yeah. Before we begin today, while many of you were able to see it, Mother Nature appropriately felt that being able to see both a full solar eclipse and the aurora event of the century was a bit too much for us here over in Pennsylvania. We were socked in with some of the stingiest, slowest moving rainstorms I've ever seen in my life. Did any of you guys have a chance to actually see that amazing event?
only on Instagram. Literally just by scrolling. It was raining here, so.
I did. I had an amazing display considering I'm down in the far southwest of the UK. It was really unexpected, but I didn't expect to see it that night. I was actually out looking for owls, and then all of a sudden took a look up at the sky and was like, whoa, it's here. And yeah, we had a great few hours of it.
Yeah, David, what did it look like? Because I didn't see it. I only saw like Yana over here. My whole Instagram lit up with everyone I know except for people around me, like right in the same, I guess, geography setting.
Yeah. I mean, I've never had the chance to see it before. The sky was just, it was just full of color. That's the only way I can describe it. And you could see it changing, moving. It was, I genuinely think once in a lifetime, certainly from where I live, to get a chance to see it, everything aligned. It was a new moon. It was a clear night. It was still, just happened to be awake at that time to take a look outside. Yeah, I was very, very lucky, I think. Well, I mean, more people than ever, I think, were lucky to see it, perhaps apart from you guys, unfortunately.
Well, could you see it without just naked eye when you walk outside? Was it bright? Was it dim? Could you just explain some of that?
It was bright. It felt like it. Typical. I think useful for this conversation. It felt like there was sky glow. It felt, and a lot of people I think have mistaken it for sky glow. Particularly in the past, but especially over the last week or so. So the sky was bright. There was a real color to it, and you could see it clearly and vividly just with your eyes. And then taking some sort of longer exposure on the camera, that everything just lit up with loads of different colors, but you could see it moving across. It wasn't just a static glow. There was definite movement in there. It was, brilliant.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, I'm very jealous of everyone who's seen it, but congratulations. I'm very glad that you were able to see it. I know we had Travis Nowitzki on earlier, and he kind of makes a side hustle taking photos of these auroras, and he wrote a book in conjunction with a astrophysicist, Annette Lee, and this is some Native Americans here in the States that wrote a book talking about the aurora and the Native American ties to it, like the Native American heritage to it. And it's a phenomenal book, Spirits Dancing, if any of you guys are interested. You can definitely pick it up. I think it's in Minnesota, Free Press in Minnesota or something like that, but definitely highly recommend that. David, do you think that seeing the aurora the way you saw it and the way so many people saw it, because I saw literally everyone went outside, it seems like, if they're able to, and then looked up. Do you think there's any positive momentum in regards to understanding our relationship to night and the night sky that could be drawn from this?
Yeah, I think so. It's, like you say, so many people saw it. This wasn't just an event confined to, the astronomers amongst us. It was widely available to just the general public. And I think, I certainly saw the kind of the nights that followed it where people were going to go out and try and get a glimpse of it, once it'd been and gone. People going out and venturing out at night, going to some of the dark places. I don't know, Jack, whether you had an influx of people into the Lake District or not, but I know certainly some of the national parks down this way had people going out. And I think that's one of the key things is actually people realize that there's these amazing things taking place at night that they can go and see. So, I think there's some awareness. I still don't think there's that link between the things that impact the night and prevent these things from being seen on a more regular scale, perhaps. But it got people outside, and that's one of the best things we can hope for, I think, to try and bring people along with the journey that we're trying to take them on. Anyway.
What border were you at?
I have absolutely no idea.
It's all right. Do you know how big the city, like a zone, is that you're in?
So I'm quite rural. I'm on the edge of a national landscape. It's not one of our dark sky parks, but it's pretty dark. Unfortunately, they're building a nuclear power station over the hill, which normally lights up the sky bright white all night long. So it's probably not the darkest, but yeah, there's a fairly decent sized town a few miles away. So it was, considering that it's not the best of or the darkest of conditions, it's fairly dark.
Okay. Well,
in Cumbria, north of England, where I am, I confess I went to bed early because I was working the day after. But some of the images the photographers took were absolutely mind-blowing. It's the best aurora in England for 20 years. And there was quite a bit of Facebook chat following about the impact of light pollution. David's right, there isn't that connection really between experiencing that and looking at your own lighting and joining the campaign. But I think we're getting there slowly.
Yeah, because I think this is something that could only be seen if you're really in a rural area, right? This isn't something that I could see out my window in a major city, right?
People in the smaller towns saw it. It depends the level of light pollution affected it, yeah.
Well, there's something to be said about that. So, very interesting. This makes for a nice transition. So we can switch over to a very healthy set of ecological news here. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's amazing how this topic is so rooted in ecology. Here in North America, we witnessed a full solar eclipse that cut through some of the most populated areas of the continent. There were several zoos that sat directly in the path of the eclipse, and they didn't hesitate to observe the residents. In Indianapolis, leading up to totality, gibbons hooted, sea lions began calling, elephants paused their playful antics, and birds began roosting to totality. In Fort Worth, tortoises rushed to begin their nightly barn ritual. The silverback gorilla, Elmo, yawned more frequently, with yawning kind of being a warning of hostility and dominance in monkey lingo. So he's a little bit uneasy. Nocturnal animals, including some owls, began waking. In Quebec, the Himalayan black bears snoozed right through it. The Japanese monkey, the macaque, stopped all movements and entered a moment of serene calm, as did typically vocal red-crowned cranes. Dr. Peter Murray, an associate professor over at the University of Southern Queensland in wildlife management, posited an interesting possibility for why some animals alter their daytime behavior during a total eclipse. Murray believes that the animals simply responded to the unexpected, unexplained darkness as a bad omen based on lifetime experiences with dark skies, such as rainstorms. He further explains in an article from the Australian Broadcast Corporation that the animal behavior can be manipulated by changing photoperiods, otherwise known as changing the length of the day, hence describing how the eclipse can affect some animals that were previously referenced. Do you guys have any thoughts on that detail right there? Because I think that's kind of like a little microcosm into how actual light pollution plays with some of these species.
There's no surprise whatsoever that animals are going to start changing their behavior where there's an extreme, let's call it an extreme event to their kind of natural surroundings, their normal rhythm. And this really comes down to where some of the major issues are regarding light pollution and changing those natural cycles of day and night and changing those levels of light. So, in this occasion, it's no different from kind of like a extreme weather event or, unseasonably be cold or hot periods of time of year where animals are built on this cycle and this process that's triggered by these natural events, and they're going to be impacted by this. It's very different to humans where we know these things are coming. We're kind of prepared for them and we can adapt to them really rapidly. That just biodiversity just doesn't have that ability to effectively grin and bear it. So it's going to change these things. So it's no surprise. I mean, it's really cool that we're being able to study that and kind of see that change happening, particularly with this eclipse. I think, it's, as you say, it's kind of gone for a sort of an ideal place to observe those changes in behavior. But really, this is happening on a global scale every single night where we're altering that time of darkness and kind of extending daylight hours into the night. So this is really just a small snippet of what we're seeing and some of the problems that we're seeing and changes in behavior in particular. Yeah, unfortunately playing out over a much longer period of time.
Right. And David, to your point, we can go inside and create an artificial environment of our own, right? I mean, animals are just stuck out there. They can do what they can and kind of get away from certain things. But unless you're in a zoo, I guess in the zoo you might have a little shelter, but for the most part, in the wild.
Yeah.
Well, it's said that insect activity increases by 31.4% at night. But don't take my word for it. Take the findings of Dr. Mark Wong at the University of Western Australia, which is a link is over in the show page. Interestingly, they found that nocturnal activity spiked around aquatic areas as nighttime predators, such as fish, tended to sleep at night versus terrestrial areas that contended with predatory bats. Also cited as a reason for nighttime activity was daytime temperature. And since we're talking temperatures, a couple of weeks ago, we actually had an unseasonably warm spell here. It felt like July and April. At the time, we sat out back for a fire and noticed that there's some blinking in the trees. Within a couple of days, there's a full-blown firefly show in our backyard, probably one of the better ones I've seen in my life. We don't have any direct lights that hit this part of the yard, so it's usually always dark. I'm using this as a transition to one of my favorite dark sky topics, and probably one of yours, so let's talk fireflies. Not surprisingly, fireflies or lightning bugs that are known around these parts are facing significant and serious threats. From signs of the total environment, researchers across 4 colleges and the United States Department of Agriculture identified changing climate patterns related to global warming as a primary culprit, including the greater variation in extreme and unexpected climatic conditions, such as drought or excessively wet conditions. Researchers in that study called out artificial light at night, though I have 2 additional articles that look specifically at how artificial light impacts fireflies. First, from the Journal of Insect Behavior, we learned that artificial light at night disrupts both predatory and courtship-related communications. They looked at 114 male and 57 female fireflies, the Photinus and the Photurus firefly species, both common to the Americas. Researchers constructed 6 tent structures with and without white LED lights, including 3 control tents. The white light temperature was chosen to mimic the human lighting that they would see in the environment. With regards to predation, not much change versus the population of subjected to light and to the controlled no light population. One thing to note, males flash less when the females weren't flashing. However, for courtship, male fireflies flash less under lit conditions regardless of what flashing patterns the females did under lit conditions. In a separate article in the International Journal of Tropical Insect Science, researchers found that the intensity of artificial light at night affected the propagation of larvae and adults for 3 firefly species. This study hinted at a shifting composition of habitat, including increased abundance of larvae prey snails. David, this is your world, although I don't think you guys have fireflies over there, right?
No, we do. We do. Fireflies encompass a wide range of species that use the bioluminescence to glow. We don't quite have the same kind of species that you're blessed with over there in the States and certainly in some of the parts of the world, but we've worms. But they tend to be flightless. Well, the females are flightless and they tend to be the ones that glow. We've got them right across Northern Europe. A few different species as well, but not quite as good as shows as you guys get, but we do have them. And yeah, it's the impact of light pollution is really significant on fireflies globally. You know, there was a global study looking at global perspective looking at the threats to fireflies. You know, with habitat loss and change is key, chemical pesticide use, and then light pollution is the other thing. And we're still learning a lot about them, but you know, I think it's safe to say that the lighter the night is, the less chance that these species are able to communicate, whether that be through, you know, attracting their mates or even possibly prey that they can feed on. And then obviously you see this idea, you know, a lot of the larvae feed or the species feed during their larval stage. So they don't go out and eat as an adult, and they need the snails. So getting attracted in towards these areas where there's quite a lot of artificial light. And then when they become adults, they're unable to perform their usual courtship mating rituals, which can then have that knock-on effect on populations. So yeah, there's kind of a few things where light is really causing them problems.
Yeah, I was really shocked to see the show that we saw about a month ago. And, it was like climate change is crazy. It was April and it felt like July. And they just all came out, David. It was like a full-on show. The temperature got them moving. And since it's a relatively natural area, they probably don't have the stressors that you get in a normal yard where you would have, pesticides, and you would also have, endless nonstop lighting from all different areas. Staying in the insect realm just for a minute, a study out of parasital research found that white LED beta traps were actually less effective than other colored temperatures for luring potentially malaria-carrying Anopheles mosquitoes.
I think the key thing to say with that is, it's all of the studies that are coming out on different species. It's clear to see that color of the light is not going to be a silver bullet for all species. Different species seem to react to different colors in different ways, so some species being perhaps less impacted by the warmer colors, and then other species being less impacted by the cooler colors. We're not going to solve the impacts of artificial lighting on particularly insects just by switching over to one color. So I think that's probably one of the interesting things there. The white LED traps are not as effective as some of the others for capturing these mosquitoes, whereas, the white LED traps are much more effective at capturing some of the other species of insect species around the world. So I think that's probably the key thing to point towards that. And it also links back to what you were saying around climate change and, particularly with some of the concerns around the disease-carrying mosquitoes moving further from the tropics, and being able to survive kind of into some of the areas where they're not yet found. I think there's that kind of double-edged sword that's going to be impacting the spread of those species into areas where they're not currently found.
Did you read you probably did, the Royal Transactions B light pollution edition that came out back in November or October. And one of the articles in there, actually the first article, defined light as a environmental pollutant. And it made no gripes on it. It went straight to the definition, defining it because of the effect. Because I think what you just said there is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to it, is that all light in some way is changing and impacting the environment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's in my eyes, there's no doubt about it. There's no such thing as particularly wildlife-friendly lighting. You can have some lighting that's better than others, but any artificial light is going to change those natural cycles, those natural rhythms of day and night. So there's no such thing as in my eyes, as wildlife-friendly lighting. That's just, everything we know is it's causing a change to biodiversity. Some may affect some species more than others, but no such thing as something that's going to be suitable for everything. The only thing is the natural rhythm of day and night.
Well, here's one set of creatures that most people don't think of as being affected by light pollution. Researchers in the journal Forest looked at two vascular plants, the Japanese spindle tree and the hybrid tea rose. It's found that artificial light at night did two things. First, continuous artificial light at night impaired the plant's ability to photosynthesize and respirate. And second, the level of intensity of the artificial light impaired the Japanese spindle tree more than the hybrid tea rose. And I'm assuming, David, you probably don't have any dealings on plants here. You're looking at invertebrates the whole time, or do you guys actually see a kind of a symbiotic relationship going on there?
Yeah, we do. It's really important. A lot of insects time their kind of movement through stages of their life to coincide with host plants, for example. So, they'll emerge from the ground as their sort of larvae, or, even the caterpillars of moth and things to go and feed on some of the species that they've co-evolved with. So if we're seeing a change in kind of how the plants are growing, so whether they're growing quicker or slower, then that can have that knock-on impact on then the invertebrate species that live off those. And, that can be caused by lighting, but also climate change as well. So again, these two things are really significantly linked, and the impact on one can have an even greater impact on the other.
How do you get down to the variable in that? Like, how do you figure out which is causing what effect?
I don't think it's possible to distinct. It's kind of everything together, right? We can just try to reduce some of the pollutants or pressures rather than like identify which specific pressure causing the most pain to the environment.
Because we see a lot of that on the crime side, right? It's so hard to disentangle one variable and then identify what is the driver of that. And I'm curious, I mean, I understand for lighting, it's a little easier for insects because you can kind of set up some of these control studies, right? You can kind of set up some of these spaces. You can't really do that on the crime side, but I guess it's just very interesting. How are you able to make the confident argument that saying climate change plays a role here, but so do lights?
I think from what David said, he's absolutely right that for biodiversity, any artificial light at night is disrupting their normal patterns. So in that sense, because we have got a crisis of extinction, then there should be a precautionary principle to accept the positive correlation that more light pollution is going to harm that biodiversity and work on that basis rather than trying to disaggregate what proportion is due to chemical inputs as opposed to climate change, as opposed to artificial light at night. In Cumbria, where I work now, all our new lighting is generally down to 2,200 kelvins, which is a sort of good balance to not, because, you know, some people have used red lights to protect horseshoe bats, but then that's disrupting some of the bird migratory routes. So we've gone for that warm colour temperature, trying to get the UV spectrum and the narrow band as minimum as possible. But David's absolutely right. Preferably, we don't want the lights on when they're not serving a purpose, and that's what we should be aiming for as an organisation and a campaign.
There was a recent article, well, it's kind of not very developed research, but it exists on the correlation between light pollution and like global warming and air pollution specifically. And some studies basically indicate that there is a direct relation between those two, because increased artificial light at night stops some chemical cleaning processes in the atmosphere. I cannot explain it in more detail because it's not my field, but there is a correlation between them. So basically, we should maybe in like political work, awareness raising work, should all, because people know what global warming is. Like we meet these consequences every day. Like you said, you had the temperature of July in April or May. So maybe we should put
Yana,
look, guys, light pollution also increases global warming.
We had 1 week of winter this year. 1 week where it was actually felt like winter, and it snowed like 3 times that week. So we got it. It came through. It was a nice, good, solid week of winter. But 1 week, everything else was, and I guess I'm trying to do the conversion here, but usually we're like around like 3 degrees in the winter, 3 degrees Celsius, usually like, 3 to 4. We're probably in the teens most of the time, but we had that 1 week where it was right around 0 or a little below 0, which I like. I like it to be like negative, 2 and -5. I want winter. I like all 4 seasons, but, it's nice to have a real winter. But 1 week.
How ironic that the LED product has reduced energy consumption, but because of that, there's so much more going in. So I think it's estimated that 16% of all electricity globally is used on lighting, and that's on the increase. It's not right. We're not saving any energy from this product.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of the new buildings, new construction that's being set up, and I don't know how it is over in the UK, but for sports arenas specifically, that's kind of a focal point to build these like massive, I guess, commercial party atmospheres where everything is lit up kind of like Vegas with LED boards and everything around it. And that approach, you talk about the reduced price of LEDs haven't done anything to cut energy efficient. If anything, we're probably using more energy now with the impact of LEDs than we did prior. I have a few more ecology ones and then we'll move out of here. So Under the Sea in the Ecohydrology and Hydrobiology journal found that sound and light pollution affected zebra mussels. Light and sound contributed to an increase in free radical-driven oxidative damage and a reduction in protein and lipid compounds. From scientific reports, the insect larvae Chaeroborus flavicans subjected themselves to a greater risk under direct light sources, say a street light. Under normal conditions, the larvae hides deep underwater until nighttime when it rises to the top to feed. Under artificial light at night, the larvae hung out in a middle depth, which isn't starved of oxygen like the deeper daytime depths, but rather offers greater risk of predation. And then another one from the Proceedings of Royal Society B found that the artificial light combined with warmer ocean temperatures may increase sea urchin grazing pressures on rocky reefs. I'll finish up with these two environmental ones as well. May just know the house sparrow from environmental pollution. Artificial light at night only appeared to affect house sparrows when involved in breeding. At that time, sparrows began their day earlier. Both exposed and non-exposed house sparrows ended up their days at the same time. Also, artificial light did not appear to have much of behavioral change outside of breeding activity. And one last ecology one. Researchers at the University of New Mexico, Nanyang Technology University, and the National University of Singapore identified that blue light at night, which includes white LEDs, as being a prime threat to migratory birds. All those, I think the latter ones are kind of a rehash of studies we've already seen. So that's pretty... Dave, do you have anything additional to add for the ecology stuff before we leave this segment? I think that was a pretty thorough approach on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just now we're seeing this body of evidence just grow and grow and grow. And, particularly on individual species, there's nowhere that kind of is not being impacted by
it really does.
Light, particularly. Yeah. And this evidence base now is so huge and significant. It outweighs a lot of the other pollutants which are treated with much more disdain particularly by policymakers. It's at what point do they go, oh, actually, we can see clearly now that artificial light's having a problem. It's relatively straightforward to solve compared to some of the other issues that I have to work with and try and protect invertebrates from. Light pollution's easy to fix. Like, why aren't we doing it and buying ourselves perhaps more time to kind of tackle some of those bigger, perhaps more complex pressures that we're working with? And, to me, it's an obvious thing. Well, to all of us here, it's an obvious thing to tackle and work on. But, there's nothing that's pointing in the other direction, which is saying artificial light is not causing a problem. So really, enough's enough. Let's get it sorted and give nature a chance to bounce back.
Amen. All right. I'm subscribing, David. All right. So here's a good little spot for a breather, as we just had that excellent ecology roundup, and you guys somehow bore with me as I struggled to make it through that one. I appreciate it. And I will thank you at home for really joining us today. I want to thank my incredible panel right now. I got David Smith of Buglife, soon-to-be Dr. Yana Yakushina, and the Dark Sky Officer of Cumbria, Mr. Jack Ellerby. As you're probably aware, this show is completely 100% listener-supported. You can be one of those listeners that helps us offset our costs of putting the show together. It's not magic, friends. It does cost a bit to run the show. And in addition to some production-related expenses, i.e. our man Caden, who's listening right now, we can put together an extensive Instagram, TikTok program that actually helps listeners encapsulate what you hear in the show. Maybe you can use it for sharing with friends or help just spread the word about dark skies. We have a detailed page on LinkedIn for which you can find most of the articles you hear in this story or in this show and be able to share it or dive deeper into it. And recently I put together a cumulative list of all of the ecology articles that we discuss on this show. You can find it over our website, lightpollutionnews.com/research/ecology. Oh, and we even have a new texting line included in this very episode. Just look at the description on whatever podcast player you have. It enables you to directly contact us without going through the pesky effort of writing an email or trying to reach out to us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like for us to read on the show, or if you just want to reach out and say hi, it's as simple as a free text to us. You just click on that link right there at the very top of the show notes for this show on whatever pod player you're listening to. The bottom line, what I'm getting to, is that if you feel that what we do is important, if you believe in the show and you want to see it thrive in the future, we really could use your hands. Supporters start at $3 a month, and literally for the price of coffee in most U.S. cities, including my old college buddy's tiny town of Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, it's $3 is the price of coffee. So $3 a month, that's all. That's all I'm asking. If you think the show is worth it, at the very least, the price of coffee, we'd be greatly appreciative. It's an excellent way to say thank you and to help us keep moving things forward. I wouldn't say we're completely solving yet, but we're getting there, and production expenses do add up. If you're already a supporter, thank you. Thank you so much. We look to continue to push ahead with your support in doing things such as inviting you to live recordings of Light Pollution News. And if none of this is anything that you're either willing we're able to do. We really could use some, preferably 5-star reviews in whatever podcast player you're using. These ratings and reviews act as guides for prospective listeners, and without them, the show struggles to hit a wider audience. So thank you once again. I truly appreciate it. I know Caitlin, who cuts up our shows in a bite-sized pieces for social media, truly appreciates it. And I know our man, Caden, who does all of the editing and production work, also is very grateful as well. So, David, before we move on to some of the stuff that I think, Yana, you might have a little more impact on, the articles that I saw enter my feed a few months ago looked like Buglife is making waves in the UK. And there were a number of articles whereby Buglife had impacted public policy of both small and modest-sized communities in the UK. How on earth do you get people excited about bugs?
And it's a challenge. We're up against years of fear and discrimination against bugs. So we've got a lot of work to do, but invertebrates are just amazing. There's more species of invertebrates than any other group of animals on the planet. But the variety is mind-blowing, and I get to represent those things, then that's from the smallest rothators, which are microscopic zooplanktons, right up to the colossal squid and everything in between. We're dealing with that huge variety. To get people engaged and infused, it's really a lot to do with education, talking about why the invertebrates are so vital to everything that we benefit from on the planet. People are really familiar with pollination and pollinating our crops so that helping provide the food we eat, but also insects help keep our soils fertile. They help clean up all of our waterways, and really they form the bottom of the ecological pyramid. So without them supporting and without really good populations and of a variety and a diversity of insect and invertebrate life, everything above that's going to fall apart, So we start taking away food from some of the more well-known megafauna that that people seem to love and care. So without the small things, we're not going to have the exciting things that people care more so about. So that's a really valid reason to do that, to help support them. And the thing that I really like about working in this field and working with the invertebrates is that the interventions that you make have almost an immediate kind of effect. So even if you just plant a few small wildflowers in a pot on a windowsill or on a balcony, or if you've got a big garden, almost straight away you'll see insects coming to find those. So that change is almost instant, and that's really good to be able to have that positive impact in a world where the environment is going downhill rapidly. So trying to look for those small little wins is vital. But obviously the converse to that is that they also show the greatest impact to the smallest pollutants or damaging change that we make as people as well. So that's why, particularly when we look at light pollution, the insects seem to be more detrimentally impacted than some of the other species on the planet. Or it may just be that we're studying more individual species and able to show small changes is having a worse impact. So I think they're a great bunch of species to be working with, and we're doing our best to get there, and again, just to make sure that people treat them with a little bit more respect than they perhaps have done in the past.
I'm very impressed at the work you guys have done. To put a topic like insects, which evokes fear and misery in so many people. I feel like you're either an insect person or you're not. Like, I love insects. I think they're so cool, and I mean, I know this sounds weird, like the fact of what wasps do and how they live and how they kind of are parasitic and they control, like, it blows my mind that there's organisms out there that do things that insects do. And I hope I never see them larger than an insect, but it's very cool. It's very cool to see, because David, aren't they kind of like evolutionary holdovers? Like of a land that was?
Yeah. And in certain places, some of them they've been there and they've been active since, almost the dawn of time. Some of the dung beetle species that, they evolved way before, the dinosaurs were about, and then they were there clearing up after the dinosaurs, and, they're still going strong today. So yeah, I think they're amazing. They'll be here long after we're gone. But the downfall of them at the moment may be, maybe a contribution to our downfall. We need to make sure that we're keeping their bodies stable so that we can keep our population stable,
Yeah, no doubt. I feel like Canadian geese and squirrels will be there too. But
yeah, probably.
We'll see. Yeah, good stuff, man. Like I remember seeing those go through, and you had, even got stuff, I think, in front of Parliament, which is, that's amazing. Great work. Gotta love it. If you can get people excited about something with 6 or more legs, I'm behind it.
Thank you.
So here's an interesting story that I wonder if many of you can relate to. The other day, I purchased a new headlamp. I have a habit of losing small things. My wife will tell you that anything small, she has to kind of make sure it stays in a certain area or I'll lose it. So like a dummy, I left my headlamp at a cabin we stayed at, and I ended up purchasing a new one, a really nice black diamond headlamp, complete with a adjustable brightness for both the white and red colors. But on the side of the headlamp, there are these 3 tiny and, of course, very bright blue LED lights. They literally come on any time you touch any setting on this headlamp. And they're so bright, they actually disturb your night vision if you're out in a dark spot and you want to have your night vision. So it forced me to actually pick up a roll of electrical tape and cover it up. Do you guys have any of these things around your house, these indicator lights? I feel like we have the proliferation of pointless blinking lights on things that don't need blinking lights. Well, CNN had a story asking if bright indicator lights were ruining your sleep. And a fella interviewed in this story actually did the exact same thing I did, where he was standing on a ladder, got some electrical tape, and covered up pointless indicator lights that were coming from, I guess, maybe maybe it was coming from a smoke detector or something. We're not talking about the red blinking light. So if you're not aware, you might want to check this out. And thankfully, most routers and modems actually, because they blink, they have a lot of indicator lights on them. But did you know you could actually turn those off? So if you have that in your bedroom or whatnot, and you don't want to have the lights on, you can actually go in. And if you go into the address that they give you when you set up, there's like a little web address, numbers. You can go in there and it'll have settings, and you can go in and turn some of those off. Do you guys have any indicator lights in your life that are causing any problems?
Yeah.
I don't have an indicator light. I think the most disturbing light I have is iPhone. Like literally every time you touch it, it blinds me, even though it has the minor settings. And I have the night regime it has now.
Yep.
I also have the red light set. It's still blinding me every time. This is the brightest light I have in my house.
I think that's just it's a great example where we actually know that light pollution is a problem for us as people, and the industry also knows it's a problem, right? If they're creating a way that we can turn the light off, there's a reason, there's a demand for that. There's a reason that we're going, actually, we don't want these indicator lights on all the time. And, even when you look to eye masks and blackout blinds, and there is an understanding that light pollution is a problem. It's just that people aren't connecting the dots or the little red indicators all together. But it's something that drives me mad, particularly when I go to hotel rooms and it's like you've got a pitch black room and you've got one bright red light that just lights everything up. And once you know it's there, you just can't ignore it.
Or you have a white blinking light somewhere, and hotel rooms are really the worst with that. And they're getting worse. Yeah. Well, you guys heard back in the fall, right, when they were trying to put the Sphere over in Stratford, that James Dolan was going to buy people blackout curtains. Just, out of the kindness of his heart, to put this giant glowing orb in the city. What a guy. Wow. So on the research front, we have an article from the Journal of Hypertension Research that involves studying male rats. It found that artificial light at night affected rat blood pressure patterns. Typically, blood pressure rises at night, but when exposed to alum, the pattern became unhinged, pointing out potential impacts of cardiovascular control of blood pressure. And an interesting one out of the Journal of Brain Disorders found that, yes, indeed, light pollution in part is stresses, including anxiety and depression on afflicted rats. To offset this, researchers provided affected rats with some sort of curcumin treatment, and those rats taking curcumin reduced associated stresses. For you at home may not be aware, curcumin is one of the main ingredients in the Asian spice turmeric. So a little bit of health news right there. We have some interesting news out of Texas. And I know none of you guys are going to be as close to this story as me or when we had Stephen Hummel back on it. But U.S. Customs and Border Patrol Agency actually has solicited the community comments for a proposed 25.15-mile extension of the planned 44.7-mile non-continuous border wall complex, which features intense stadium-style lighting. The proposed stretch, including the currently built piece, sits northwest of Big Bend National Park. Now, we just got done visiting Big Bend. We went down there for the eclipse. I didn't know what to expect down at Big Bend, which sits in a desert. And it has its own little tiny mountain range that's as old as the Appalachians. Really blew my mind. One of the coolest and most unique places I've ever been to. Big Bend is part of the Greater Big Bend International Dark Sky Reserve, which is a joint reserve coordinated by both the Mexican and U.S. communities in that area. Former guest Stephen Hummel believes that if the lighting goes into effect, it will put an end to the reserve. Do you guys have any comparable situations like this? Like, how does the UK work with it? I mean, here, we're talking about lighting as a security concern, right? I don't understand why it has to be always on lighting, why you can't dial it in and turn on lights, why it can't be motion detected lighting. But is the U.S. the only country, the only democracy, I should say, that needs to have massive security lights to wall a border?
No, it's interesting. I think the UK and Ireland have got the highest density of dark sky reserves, parks, communities. Part of the problem is that the boundaries are defined around existing intrinsic dark landscapes. So a lot of the light pollution affecting those geographies are from the urban areas and towns and around and about. So in Cumbria, we've actually produced with all the local authorities a guide which covers the middle of towns as much as the deep rural areas, because we need to tackle it at a macro scale. That covers Cumbria, the Yorkshire Dales, which is a national park, and another special designated landscape. But even within those areas, until we get some form of consent process to ditch the poor lighting and only allow good lighting or no lighting in many cases, as David hinted, we're on the back foot, because even in the dark sky reserve, the Yorkshire Dales, which is part in Cumbria and part in Yorkshire, there's crap lights being installed by electricians and homeowners basically every day of the week. So we really can't go on as where we are. So dark sky reserves are wonderful for raising awareness, but at the moment they're not nailing the solution. We need more than that.
Yeah, and we'll have an article coming up on that in just a little bit, which I agree. It's well, in this case, this is a belief by an agency of a government that believes that the only way to have security is by, first off, building this ludicrous wall. I'll put my political flag out there. And then second, to have it lit up like it's, an NFL stadium day in and day out. And I mean, I don't know what the deterrence is.
The latest research looked at where there was dimming of street lights and part switch-offs in Oxfordshire. And that showed that crime actually fell overall by 45%, particularly vehicular crime. And the thought is that if you provide a bit of illumination, the criminal can A, see any valuables within the vehicle, and B, they need a little bit of light in order to break into the vehicle. So I think there's so much lighting in our environment now that we have to start thinking a bit more counterintuitively. And actually darkness can actually provide more safety in many ways, as long as people can feel confident in a darkness. Yeah, I actually love being in a dark environment because I can spot any threats of lighting coming. And my other senses kick in, the sound kicks in, and I can detect suspicious behaviour more easily in a dark environment. It maybe sounds a bit weird. Maybe I was brought up in a rural area rather than a town.
I understand exactly where you're going on that, Jack. I wonder, is part of the reason why people are afraid of being in dark environments, is it because they're not used to using other senses?
I think there's an element to that, but we are, as a species, we are quite ocular-centric, so I think our visual sense is about 70% of the domination. But certainly when you talk to Nick Dunn, the professor at Lancaster Uni, he's looked at the cultural evolution of why we have fear at night. And that's where, the talks that David does and awareness and we all do, it's just making people reprogram their minds that darkness isn't a threat. It's actually really healthy and really beneficial for us in every sense.
I was just thinking that we've been brainwashed. Like, I always compare lighting industry kind of to tobacco industry. Because back in the day when they started to produce cigarettes, doctors were prescribing cigarettes to heal, like, I don't know, coughing issues. So it was kind of a medicine, and it was fully funded. All this research was fully funded and supported by tobacco industry. And according to my research and what I can see, similar was going for lighting. There was a lot of research which supported our thinking that light actually decreases the crime. I mean, it probably does decrease the crime, but it's not the only thing which should be focused on when we create a giant amount of light in every street or road, because it's a lot of factors which are involved in it.
Yeah. Yana, how do you feel if you're in a city? How do you feel when you're in a dark environment?
And I don't think it's, well, first of all, I'm not advocating for a complete switch off in the cities.
What I'm asking is, I'm not asking that on a, should we turn lights on off? I had Jennifer Huygen on a while back who was advocating for having always on lights in a park. And her concern was, it was a safety concern, but it wasn't really a concern that it wasn't, I want to phrase this in a way that doesn't sound condescending because I don't want to be insulting her because this is not what I want to do, but it wasn't a concern that was, I guess, to me, it's fully rational. It was much more of an emotional concern. And this is something that I think is probably more based in women than men. I'm not saying that men can't have that concern. I'm sure plenty do. But if it was something that she couldn't really put her thumb on as there's no, you can't use it as a numbers game saying, this X happens here, Y happens there. So I'm curious, Yana, you being the only woman on our panel today, what are your thoughts on, how do you feel in darker environments?
I mean, I would just agree with the statements which to keep the lights on, but it's about the dimmer lights and the warmer lights. And actually there was I'm like a true researcher today. So there was a research, actually societal research survey about the feeling of safety in women and young girls. And the research found out that they feel safer when the light is dimmer, when the lights are on, obviously, but the lights are like dimmer, less bright, because when you have very bright lights, especially in the park, you have this contrast, which you mentioned earlier, when you're losing your night vision. So you see only the illuminated path, which you can follow, but you basically cannot see what's going on in the darkness. For example, like in the forest, like if you talk about the bigger country, like you can literally have pretty big forest around you. Let's put it that way. So you get, I think your feeling of safety decreasing with it because of this contrast. So I believe if you dim the lights, you can increase the visibility and people will actually feel safer, including especially women and girls. Because I also believe as a representative of female community here, I believe in women, the feeling of safety is a more concern when we talk about the lighting.
And I apologize for singling you out. I didn't mean it make you as the sole representative of all women around the world.
Well, I think it's important, Yana. In Cumbria, we've had some towns where there's been antisocial behaviour towards females through parks at night. Instead, we've installed those warm colours, 2,200, and they're dimmed at 9 o'clock. And actually, 99% of the public don't know they're dimmed. And I think the key message is you don't need a great deal of lux. You don't need a huge amount of illumination to orientate yourself, see any risk, and feel safe. And I think we've been led down that over-intense light. Arup did, I think you're referring to this, Arup did some work with females in Australia, and it showed that these 4,000, 5,000 Kelvin lights, as you say, were so damaging the peripheral vision and creating shadows behind trees and bollards that it was actually thwarting the feeling of safety.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Also, when you're a little bit blind like me, at night, especially when I see a shadow, I can imagine something else, and it can be just a bench. So, when you have a very high illumination, you can also your brain create something like a dog or, you can hallucinate a little bit. So this is also a big case.
So blind as a bat is an incorrect phrase then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, an interesting story out of Montreal. the fourth most populated borough of Montreal. And I'll try and get through this. I've really, really practiced this one, and I'm going to slaughter it. Just giving any Quebecois out there a warning in advance. Mercier Hochelaga Maisonneuve, we'll just abbreviate to MHM. They decided to circulate guidance for outdoor lighting. It was based on consultations with the Mount Megantic International Dark Sky Reserve and Space for Life. Their borough will be dipping its toes into promoting responsible lighting practices. Per the Montreal press release, light pollution is often known for its effects on the night sky, but the misuse of artificial light also leads to a multitude of negative effects on humans and the environment. Although artificial light is often necessary for safety to support various human activities at night, it is important that it is used correctly. Exactly what you're saying right there, Yana. The guide promotes utilizing responsibly aimed lighting fixtures, utilizing an appropriate amount of light, utilizing warm colored lighting of 3000 Kelvin or less with direct suggestion of 1800 to 22 Kelvin, and requests that businesses tone down the lighting when not in direct use, offering up suggestions including highly sensitive infrared surveillance as an alternative to using light. The borough is distributing 24,000 copies of the 12-page guide, and there's a link to the French language guide that can be found over on this show's page at lightpollutionnews.com. I did not see an English copy anywhere, but I'm sure that one actually does exist. So there's a forward movement by, one of the most populated cities in North America, which that's pretty interesting. Is that something similar to how you guys do it, Jack? Do you guys do something similar in the Lake region?
Yeah, alongside working to influence lighting policies and doing demonstration projects, we work across all organisations, charity organisations, local authorities, community groups and businesses increasingly, because the Lake District's quite a heavily populated area for visitors every year. So we run dark sky events and dark sky festivals. As you said in the intro, Bill, we started doing community lighting switch-offs, and they've become very popular because it's interesting, the dark sky movement wanted light cast, below the sort of 75 degrees, which is fine. But when you've got light on a 5 metre or a 10 metre column, it's not until they're switched off that then your mind is blown away from seeing about 50 stars when the lights are on to seeing about 3,000 and the Milky Way. And yeah, we produce guides, particularly for accommodation businesses, so that their guests can come and stay, take the guides out, know where to look for the Orion constellation, and do
you produce guides for the actual residents and businesses in that area?
Only for the switch-off areas, but okay. A lot of materials are online as well. We've got a body in England called the Campaign to Protect Rural England, and I think for 12 years now, they've run an annual star count. So in the small moon weather window in the beginning of February, they ask residents to go out after 7 o'clock, switch the home lights off, let their eyes adjust, and then find the Orion constellation and count how many stars they can see within that. And that's, it's engaged about 4,000 people across the country. It's a nice way of getting people outside, a bit like we were saying earlier about experiencing the aurora.
Right.
It's connecting people with that wider universe.
Yeah. Well, we have good news from Chile. A regulation finalized in 2023 looks to reduce light pollution on a national scale. The Ministry of Environment started work on revisions to the current light pollution law in 2019. Currently, as a past guest, Betty Maya Foote, Frank Torina, and Isa Muhammad have referenced, there's still noticeable amounts of light pollution in the Atacama Desert area from miles away from where they were looking in parts of the observatory areas. The new regulation enacted stronger language to protect biodiversity and human health, aiming to reduce color temperature, emitting to a maximum of 7% blue light, and promotes responsible fixtures. If we compare light pollution to water pollution, here in the U.S., it took major disasters and legislation, both at the state and federal levels, to create countless government agencies to curb water pollution. And at that, while we have a handle on point source pollutants, we are still nearly helpless at curbing non-point source pollutants. Yana, we make rules and regulations, or in Montreal's case, suggestions, but how do we actually obtain buy-in? How do we overcome this persistent tragedy of the commons?
I think the best start is awareness raising. Again, by coming back to the basics, not a lot of people are aware that light pollution is a problem because light is something we used to see every day since we were born, like in the last, let's say, 50 years at least.
Well, we love light,
more.
Right? Like you love light during the daytime, right here, what I'm doing, right? I need to be able to read. We love light.
And this is the main problem with light because light is something desirable. When we talk about other forms of pollution, like you mentioned, water pollution or air pollution or whatsoever, it's something what we don't like. And also it was very well communicated. The marketing campaign about other pollutants are way bigger than we're talking about light pollution, unfortunately. Like, thank you for your podcast. Like, it's an important source to direct people to listen to this, right? So yeah, this is the biggest problem, and the biggest start is changing the perception. And then, like, in your previous discussion, you mentioned presence or existence of guidelines or some kind of documents which we can hang to politicians or, I don't know, communities. And I think it's also an important step to have like these short documents which will outline the problem itself, explaining why light pollution is an issue, and then suggesting the basic beginning, I don't know, measures which can be adopted. Like, again, David mentioned it already, like light pollution is pretty easy to be solved if we're not talking about indicating, I don't know, some technical requirements, rather like, let's dim a little bit or like change the lighting bulbs. So, and if we can have the standards which we can, well, guidelines more, like recommendations which we can, or explanation document which we can hang to politician or communities, it's also can raise a certain awareness and potential actions towards the more serious regulations or law. Like, I see it as this path, kind of, and also communication with the general public and industry through the workshops and so on. But there's a lot of work to do. But I'm happy to see that more and more regulations or standards are being adopted across the globe. Chile is a good example, but they have one of the biggest observatories in the world, which also plays a very big role to have this legislation, actually.
Well, they have this legislation, but it was agency level built, right? So it comes down to the enforcement side. And I think that's the question now, is how do you enforce it? So I don't know the history in Europe of how some of these other pollutants came to be kind of managed, right? But I suspect it took a while. It probably took a number of decades to get a handle on some of these other pollutants. Is that what we're kind of looking at here? Is this the preliminary step, kind of set the foundation? And then over time, however long that is, you can actually you have a legal precedent and you can start forming some structures around that. Is that what we're looking at here?
It's one point, like if we're talking about adoption and new legislation, yes. But on the other hand, we have existing environmental law or policy, which can be already used towards any pollutant without adopting any new legislation. And most of the governments actually don't want to deal with adopting new law, especially if we're talking about European Union, which is a very difficult process to adopt any legislation or policy there. So we may point to specific norms or policy points which are already there and say, guys, we will never achieve this, like, I don't know, ambitious targets of protection of 70% of biodiversity by 2030 if we will not address also light pollution. And then here you have this short document which will explain why, and hopefully they will act. But it's kind of different steps at the same time, rather than proposing a new legislation, but also telling them that there's something what is already there and can be used.
So, certainly in Europe and UK, obviously the climate crisis is driving a lot of policy. But when I give my talks, grassroots level, it's the wildlife impact which turns people's attitudes and behaviour. So I think we're probably playing catch up. So there's only one small piece of law where you can control nuisance under light pollution, and that is where it's prejudicial to human health, and it only affects a certain subset of lights. What we need to do is expand that harm both to the night sky but also to wildlife. You know, Buglife, David, who works for Butterfly Conservation, all of these bodies are saying light pollution is a significant issue, and there's going to be a catch-up period. And David's done some wonderful lobbying, which you can bore us about in Europe and globally. And, you know, you were briefing in Westminster last week, weren't you, David? So I think things are moving, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, because, I mean, with water and air, we can physically, tangibly identify with those pollutants. But with light pollution, we don't see a decline in insects, right? We don't see the effect it's having because most of us we're diurnal. We're up during the day and go to bed and, say heck with it at night, right?
I really think we can observe, though. If you see the tree, which is just underneath the lighting pole, it will always start bloom earlier. If you talk about insects, if you have like a light in your garden, it will be full of insects. I mean, we just don't think it's a problem. And this is the main issue. Like, we think it's okay that light attracts so many bugs around it. We don't think about it. I mean, it's a general population. Obviously, there will be exception like David's or us who are aware about the issue.
Well, that's the first step, right? Like, we didn't think that certain pesticides were a problem either, right?
It's most pollutants start off as being something deemed beneficial to humanity. It's very hard to compare. I think it's actually hard to compare light pollution to air pollution, water pollution, and actually, I see more the journey that plastic pollution's taking. And, we as a society for 50 plus years, we're just like, cool, great, single-use plastics. This stuff is brilliant. It makes our lives so much easier. It's convenient. And then, organizations were working on single-use plastics for years in the same way that organizations have been working on light pollution for years. But it took some significant media moments led, particularly in the UK, led by Sir David Attenborough and his Blue Planet program, which I think kind of had a real global impact. But people to go, whoa, this is a problem. This is something, we should do something about this. All of a sudden, then it gets press, it gets coverage, it gets the politicians going, yeah, we need to do something about this. And it's that surge of movement to address a pollutant that, until that moment, most people just completely dismissed. And I think people still dismiss a lot of pollutants. But that's what we need. We need that will, not just from the politicians, but from the wider population to kind of keep on the politicians' backs to actually kind of invoke some of these pieces of legislation and just make sure that they are being suitably used to all of the pollutants. And I think Yana and I are well aligned on this, that really the key step that we want is for light to be recognized formally or legally as a environmental pollutant. Because right now, when you look at all of the legislation, all of the policy, it's an emerging pollutant. It's something that we need more research on. We don't this podcast however many episodes of this podcast, every single time it goes out, there's more research. We've got so much research on this. Yeah. And we go back to how do we separate light out? And politicians will often come to me and say, well, how bad is light pollution? Well, it's irrelevant because it's a problem. So we can do something about it. So why shouldn't we do something about it? That's what it comes down to. It comes down to some will to actually just make those changes. And right now, people are lazy. They don't want to create changes or start to address these things. And that's the real shame, I think. David,
it's big enough that you can have a 2-hour podcast on on light pollution. Well, here in the States, we do have some legislation that's working its way through. We've mentioned previously on the Massachusetts legislation. Last month, we talked about the Illinois Bill 3501, introduced by State Senator Laura Ellman. And this one we spoke about for a little bit, and it seems to have passed through the Senate en route to the Illinois House of Representatives for additional consideration. So that bill is moving through the Illinois legislature. And if you happen to live in Pennsylvania, in this state right here where I live, we have House Bill 1803 that's been introduced, and it is out of committee. And if you're looking for more information, I actually put together a sample letter you can use to reach out to your state representative. There's a link in there that summarizes, that points out to the actual bill. There's a description of the bill summary. There's a whole bunch of good stuff over there. You can just go right over to our website, lightpollutionnews.com/HB1801-Pennsylvania, and reach out to your legislator if you're in the state. You can start building those connections and building that communication with your representative. So we do have some pieces of legislation over here on this side. I don't know how well everything is going in Europe. I suspect it is very fragmented, as will be. You guys in the UK, I remember there was an article that came up where it seemed like a little frivolous article, but, someone was suing based on that environmental code that you guys had, saying that, this light was impeding on their whatever. I have to look up that code, but I remember seeing that come through. it was kind of a frivolous lawsuit, but it was an interesting approach that they invoked what it was supposed to be used for, a light pollution piece, as an environmental catch-all. And since we're talking politics, how about this as a fundraising effort by Blaine County, Idaho? So there's a Blaine County, Idaho Democrats which want to give you a chance to bid on an intimate farm to greenhouse meal with wine, outdoor fire pits, a snow bar, and telescopes for night sky viewing with your local astronomers and local experts. And that's an estimated value of $300. That sounds like an actual, you actually get something for that. You know, you get something from your government or your representative finally. That looks like a pretty fun time out there. Okay, so we have another regulatory story here, and this is perhaps a good explanation of why car headlights here in the U.S. have become glare bombs. The story may ring true for anyone who had to replace a windshield with a new vehicle. There's such a thing called as adaptive lighting, which works through sensors and or cameras which identify where optical spot to put a light beam is. We're not talking about auto high beams, which turn on and off depending on if it senses another car coming. Now, this technology may not be so rare to my guests today. Maybe it is. I don't know how it works in Europe, but it has been existent and in operation supposedly in Europe for over a decade. Here in the good old US of A, NHTSA, which is National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, decided that they want to be much more timid about updating its rule to force adaptive lighting standards. So one reason is that shops and manufacturers disagree over the nuances of the rule, but in reality, it appears to derive from the high costs involved in testing lighting, which drew pushback from groups involved in the chain of those costs, including dealerships and auto shops. For the short term, at least right now, it's going to be a case of how I learned to stop wearing and love the glare bomb. However, I did find an interesting quote in this one, and it comes from Greg Bannon of AAA, the car and service insurer. The reason the glare seems worse in the eyes is that we're much more comfortable with warmer looking lights, not the blue-white ones that we have now. And I noticed this firsthand the other night. Parts of the road that I routinely drive had lighting change from 4,000 Kelvin temperature down to somewhere below 3,000. And I got to say, it's much less stressful to drive under warmer lights. I didn't even notice I was driving under those lights until I came back to the 4,000. And then it hit me and it hits your eye. Like you feel, I guess the best way to put it is like you feel like something is assaulting your eye, but you don't like, there's something visually stressful that you don't notice until you look and you see it. And then it dawns on you that's what it is. How is it in Europe? How do you guys have these adaptive lighting standards, and does it work better?
You're talking about the road lighting in general, right?
Well, in this case, it's going to be car headlights. Do you guys have a lot of bright, here in the U.S., when you're driving down the road, it kind of looks like you got glare bombs just blinding you on the way. Is that the same over in Europe?
I experienced the same.
So adaptive headlights may not be like the magical solution to this problem. No, I see David shaking his head. I was curious about that.
We've done some projects where we've got adaptive street lights and footway lights. So they start at 2,700 Kelvin and then they drop to 2,422 and then they go back up. They're also an indirect light and people find those really comfortable. I always say you can stare for about 1 second at a 4,000 Kelvin road light, but these adaptive lighting at that warm colour temperature, you can stare at them as long as you'd want to.
Jack, that's an interesting point, because when I look up, right, when I see a 4,000 Kelvin light, it's supposed to be the color of the moon or whatever, but I guess if the moon is about 5 feet above you, that's the color of the moon. The brightness level is so intense, right? I can't speak to any health issues you get from looking at something that bright, but I can't imagine it being good, like if you're under that for quite a while. But it's so intense, right? You get sunspots from looking up at the street light or from looking at some panel that some apartment complex irresponsibly put up. And the warm lights, you don't notice.
No, you're absolutely right. When I started this role 4 years ago, the Highway Authority had been installing 4,000 Kelvins because they did get quite a lot of expert advice, and they were advised that the moonlight was 4,000 Kelvin. But as the technology improved and the energy efficiency ratios were fairly good still for warmer colour temperatures. Then they switched straight away to 3,000 kelvins after, obviously, I gave them some of the evidence that David has mentioned. And now we're going even warmer because particularly the biodiversity evidence is a no-brainer. We need to get, below 2.4 minimum.
Yeah, and I venture to say people aren't going to notice the warmer lights. They're not going to.
When I talk to people in communities, particularly older people, they find it really glaring. And I think at the moment we're just launching an inquiry looking at car headlights, and the motor industry bodies are backing that, the AA and the Royal RAC in the UK. And potentially, I think that could be quite a deal changer in terms of understanding glare on the majority of the population and trying to get warmer colour temperatures throughout of artificial light at night.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think I know where it comes from, because there is statistics, which basically indicates that increased glare, which is caused by cars, but also the road lighting, causes a lot of traffic issues, car accidents, sometimes mortal car accidents. And I think we can literally use this statistical data to prove that we have to switch towards more warmer lighting.
Yeah. And that's kind of why LED panels, like the LED billboards, will tone down, right? So they're not blinding you as you're coming into a turn at night. It would be great to live in a world that you didn't have to feel glare all the time. But I do want to throw this out there because, Jack, you work a lot with people. I find that glare is not something that people intuitively know. I find that glare is something that has to be taught.
Yeah, it's ironic that we've replaced a lot of the old sodium lights, which, are probably about 1800s, are quite orangey, amber. People were happy with those because you actually see them as you approach the lights. But now with the full cut-off street lights, which are the norm now, people are not seeing the light until they almost walk under the column. So they perceive they're less effective. So in many ways, you're right, Bill, they're not actually noticing it as much. But when I give a talk, I have a floodlight which I plug in. So I'm in a community hall and I blast it on and everyone goes, ah! It's like they've been shot, electric shock, and that says it all for me. I don't need lots of scientific papers. That just says it all. It absolutely nails it.
That's a great prop.
Then they go home and say, oh, God, why have we bought this crap from the DIY store and put it on the side of our house?
Yeah, I'll have to go and get a panel light. That's a great prop. I like that. See how many people want to stay and hang out underneath of it. Yeah. So, well, on a culture, I'm interested in getting your guys' feel for this one. We'll be seeing a lot more of this in the U.S. as summertime lines up, and I assume that you guys probably see this as well. It's becoming the norm. City of Laguna Beach, California will opt to forego fireworks this Independence Day and replace them with the twice as expensive synchronized drone show accompanied by music. What would you guys rather have, drone shows or fireworks?
I don't understand this idea of using the night in this case the night sky as a canvas to kind of show these things. And we talked at the start around the aurora and how much satisfaction people got out of that natural thing. Why are we just trying to replicate natural phenomenon? I mean, somewhere like Laguna's blessed. It gets the bioluminescent waves, quite regularly, and that's through dinoflagellates, little plankton in the water that when they come in on the waves, they're agitated and they release a blue light. But just go and watch that. Why bother with drone shows and fireworks? There's.
We got to celebrate. Come on, David. Bah humbug. Jeez, Yana, what do you
celebrate throughout the year? Celebrate when that thing's happening.
I don't know, both of them create too many problems, not only for from the light pollution perspective, but also they really threatens the species, including domestic animals. So I'm really against both of them.
Yeah, I know.
I'm really not on the side of any of the celebrations in this type of form.
I know fireworks would always make my dog would always stress out my dog to a point that I have to get up and hold my dog down and just to control her because she just got so stressed out. She would try and burrow herself under my bed or something like that. It's trying to find a spot just that she didn't have to. It was a very, very intense moment for her. So I wonder about these because this is the norm. Drone shows are kind of the thing. And David, to your point, you hit on something that I say I say a lot is that, when we see something magnificent in nature, it blows your mind. It just, whatever it is, like we have this intrinsic, like just awe that we stand there. But when we see something that's pretty amazing or beautiful, that's man-made, it's really great. But the level is still like below nature, like we enjoy it, but it's not anywhere close to the nature side. And, we try and recreate a little piece of nature, I think, but we're imperfect, so we don't do a good job at it. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I did an environmental philosophy MA, and it's nature is other than us. We did not create it. It's unpredictable. Here in the lakes, there's a lot of pressure for adventure tourism, so putting in cable cars and luge runs and artificial attractions. But the thing is, because it's human-made, it's risk-assessed. It's the same experience every time. When you walk in the natural environment, you're getting different experiences based on the light, the weather, the seasonality, and it's that diversity and unpredictability.
Yeah, that's a good point, the unpredictability. Well, there's an article from Jasper. Jack, I think this is lining up to something you might have said earlier, specifically looking at dark sky festivals. And University of Alberta researcher Glenn Wegener and Clark Bonark released a study looking at how visitor outcomes of dark sky tourism, how people felt about light pollution, essentially. So if this study sounds familiar, it's because we briefly mentioned it a couple shows back. However, since you are here, Jack, I wanted to bring this up. My general feeling is that unlike other environmental pollutants, when I connect with people, right, they get excited about fireflies. They get excited about seeing stars. They get excited about protecting songbirds. These are things that people love. And I don't ever hear anyone say like, oh, I don't care about this stuff. They really, really, really enjoy it. But they have zero impetus to change. There's a disconnect. People don't want to change their behavior, even though they enjoy this. So how would you assess your influence in the Lakes region on people being able to go home and say, hey, you know what? I'm looking at this. Maybe we need something new for the front porch. Like this, the sconce is just, it's blinding. It's actually hitting my neighbor's property. Like, or maybe I need something new for a garage or what have you. I'm curious about your experience with that.
I think, David hinted at it earlier about the natural phenomena. It goes down to me as a basic that we need a more environmental ethic as a species. We need to see other species on par, both in terms of respect and values and needs, and see the world from their perspective. University of Exeter physics and biology departments are working together, and they're actually modelling how different types of light affect hedgehogs, moth pollinators and bats across Exeter, the city, and another small town in Cornwall. And that is revealing, really revealing. It's showing we have to have a completely different mindset to the function of artificial light on the natural world.
Do you feel that people are internalizing any of the advocacy you do?
I think so. I think they are. But, if you think how much information's out there on the internet, on your smartphones, people are bombarded with it. And when I give my talks, I say light pollution isn't at the top of any one agenda, but actually, if you get it right, you're going to save energy, you can reduce your carbon emissions. Electricity prices have gone through the roof in the UK the last 2 years because of Ukraine, so you can reduce that. You're going to protect the wildlife you love in general cases. You're going to see more night sky. You're going to attract astrotourism in the winter months, which helps the rural economy. I remember I gave a talk in quite a rural village in the Lake District, and there was a lady there. She was quite agitated that the council had removed a couple of lights because they were attached to electricity poles, and she was lobbying that the council needed to replace these lights. But I found out she was a member of the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, so I mentioned how it impacted. You'll all be familiar with the work University of Bonn, looking at songbirds, singing later into the night and singing almost all through the night with artificial light. And I mentioned that story to her, and she completely flipped, and she became one of the strongest dark sky advocates in that community. And I've never forgot that experience. And so I thought, you can get doom and gloom, but I'm hopeful the more conversations we have, the more it will have the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for such lighting, right, when her reaction to it isn't abnormal when they lose streetlights. I see stories like that all the time come through, and the media loves to play it up, and the media will they'll, especially TV, like local TV news, which are always trying to play everything up. They love playing it up because it's a way for them to draw audience interaction and then make it look like they're having an impact by having people complain about having lights out somewhere and how unsafe and how everyone's, worried about their community. They'll, bring it up to the city and look all official and everything and puts them in a good spotlight. That in itself is a very interesting dynamic that goes on. There's really I don't think there's any real statistics on if that bears out, but I think
sadly in our media world, bad news travels and good news doesn't. But we've done 5 community switch offs in the last 3 years. The only complaints I've had are those who said the lights didn't go off where I live, so they were saying they wanted more of it, not less.
Yeah, I would complain. I would be one of those that would complain about that as well. But
I think this comes down to one of the big things around why the framing of our messaging is so important. And, we're unfortunately coming at it from a place where people's immediate response is it's either all light or no light, and while I stay in quite confident in saying there's no such thing as wildlife friendly lighting, it's not about removing all lighting. It's about reducing the amount of unnecessary lighting, certainly in the first instance, and then finding a way that we can live harmoniously with the natural world, So it isn't about turning off all lights. It's just about using light in a much better way, not treating it like it's just completely easy to chuck out everywhere and hoping for the best. And I think that's vital. But when you speak to people and when you have those conversations, people on the whole do tend to get it and go, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. You're not telling me to, completely shut out all lighting and have no light in the night. We need it. It's important for us to get around and do what we need to do. And, it's kind of straight away, you're fighting, a conception that people have built over, hundreds of years, ever since we started using light to kind of, stay awake for longer, cooking meats and stuff. It's so we're fighting against that. But I think that messaging now is we're all becoming a lot more aligned. We all work together on this. And I think that is really starting to help people understand that this isn't just about completely light or completely dark.
Yeah, there was a article a number of months ago that has a quote that I love to draw from, whereby John Adams, second president of the U.S. back when he was still trying to pull together a constitution and everything, wrote to John Jay, who was over in the UK, or actually this might have been later down the line when John Jay was trying to form treaties with the UK, and he was complaining about how John Jay liked dim lights and thought that he was more in favor of getting murdered because he didn't have an always on light, down the street, and how dangerous everything was and how much safer it would be if lights were always on. So that was 1780 something. So things haven't, I don't know about safety. I don't know if they've changed much with lights, but that's a whole different topic. I do have a story here that fits in nicely to this conversation now. Outside of Reno, Nevada, the Sky Tavern ski area plans to light up the mountain range for sport usage. A group of concerned citizens wrote an opinion piece in opposition to the proposal, citing environmental impact, environmental feasibility, community disruption, and increased safety risks. Those topics stem from the main complaint, and that is perceived as an assault on the community's night sky. The Sky Tavern plans to install 73 lights, which would, per the opposition, deter from both the environmental and aesthetic beauty of the range. However, the Washoe County Board of Adjustment, which is their zoning board, approved of the installation pending the lights were limited to wintertime hours of 9 p.m. So they were shut off after 9 p.m. Sky Tavern claims that having night skiing will benefit college and high school ski teams. So something like this, is this a case of just residents being NIMBY or being not in my backyard, trying to control the status quo? Is this a nice, good, compromise? Like the ski resort's going to shut down lighting past 9 o'clock? What do we think about this? What do we make of this?
So I think there's some really interesting things at play here. Like when you look at the risk to winter sports across the world and like that window of opportunity to go skiing, snowboarding on the mountains, it's fundamentally due to this narrowing because of a warming climate, right? So using more power, whilst you may get a slightly longer season this year, you may be reducing your season, going down the line. So it's tricky because obviously, this is using light for, something that we want to do. It's using it for that recreation outside of the daylight hours where we may be able to do it. But, there is a risk that actually we're going to be shooting ourselves in the further down the time and have no chance of having that ability to be on the slope. So it's a really tricky one. And I think, I do think that this argument is not just as kind of binary as having lights or no lights. I think actually that the people looking to ski for longer maybe should be looking at the bigger picture of how they can reduce the wider impact on the world to ensure that they can be skiing for years to come.
At what point do we say, this to me sounds like purposeful, deliberate lighting with a cutoff? Is that what we want?
I look at it as a macro scale. You and John Barrentine, one of the amazing dark sky campaigners in the US, they did work, didn't they, looking at the growth of artificial light at night across the globe. And I think in the across Europe, I think he was saying there was a 10% increase in the volume of artificial light at night. So basically, the mantra needs to be, we need to preserve what dark areas we've got. We need to call, if we have to capitalise it and humanise it, we need to call it green infrastructure, which has a significant value monetary-wise, whether it's for human health or biodiversity health. We have to change the page we're working on.
This is a really good little student podcast segment, I call it, from the University of Northern Colorado, the Reflection Podcast. The student Avery Morgan conducted a survey at the Great Sand Dunes National Park to learn about dark sky tourism. Here are some of the highlights. Morgan admits that prior to doing this trip, she felt no connection or concern for dark sky parks. But after returning, she had a full appreciation of the value that they provide to society. Morgan's survey found that people who attended the park, the group they identified as going for the explicit purpose of starry night sky, spent on average of $100 to $200 per day. Morgan also found that there's a false equivalency of light and economic development. Essentially, the assertion states that where there's light, there's money. But in this case, the darkness of sand dunes showcased that dark areas could be a reliable generator of money as well. Do you guys, Jack, specifically, does the lake region benefit? Does it profit from dark skies?
Yeah, the Lake District is already a World Heritage Site and a national park, a UK national park. So it's got big attractive brands already. But I am noticing year on year, there's more and more businesses doing more dark sky activities. So mountain biking in the forests, canoeing on some of the major lakes at night, as well as astronomy. In the west of England, we have a lot of cloudy, wet nights. So the opportunity for astronomy isn't as great as some of the great places in the US. And you mentioned Chile earlier. But no, it's definitely increasing. The research from Northumberland and Galloway Forest, just over the border in Scotland, shows that generally ASTO visitors are staying visitors, and all the research shows that if you're a staying visitor rather than just a day fleeting temporary visitor, there's a greater spend. And I think the business community are picking up on that. So, and as well as that, we've got Brian Cox, and there's a lot more observatories going in, both in private residences and businesses. So there is real momentum, I think. It's not mainstream driver of tourism in the national parks in the UK yet, but it is increasing, definitely. Yeah,
because we're seeing a lot of these eco-centric, or I guess the environment, specifically, there's an environmental aspect to certain tourisms in different areas. Like, for instance, down at Big Bend, they made a big deal that they're in Dark Sky Reserve. When you went and camped, they came over and talked to you and be like, you can do this and just make sure, lights are off by this time and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I tallied up the amount of money that the astronomy club I'm part of spends, and I do all the camping organization for. Now we spend at least the money that we spent this year going to one dark sky site, just the club, not talking about individuals who actually drive up. Just the club itself spends $4,000 a year, or at least this year, and probably do it next year, in a dark sky spot. So that community is receiving just from the club $4,000. Let's not talking about people who go up there, get gas, get dinner, get lunch, get all, the groceries that go up there and, get little trinkets, go do some daytime novelties and stuff like that. There's money to be had. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like this little story here, where Morgan kind of snuffed out some of those details that oftentimes get passed over.
Certainly the Dark Sky chapter lead people in the UK, what we're wanting to do is bring those experiences to a higher level of population. So we want to bring it into suburban areas and towns as well, because we can be a bit elitist with rural recreation. You have to be fairly affluent to travel into a remote, dark area. So we're very much wanting to get those nighttime experiences. So in little old Kendal, where I live, not a big town, 25,000 population, we have an old castle right in the heart of the town. So we're looking to reduce light pollution as seen from there, so people don't have to drive 50 miles to experience the Milky Way.
Yeah. And yeah, well, wouldn't that be nice just to have your own, because have a national park in the sky. Hey, that'd be something. Well, one thing that many of us don't think about when we clamor for just saving the forgotten half of the day is the actual costs involved. And some municipalities have offered rebates, credits, or outright subsidized lighting fixture conversions. This one comes to us in David Condos at KUER Radio. Near Zion National Park, the town of Springdale met reality firsthand, spent 15 years and over $1 million to install proper street lighting that included shielding and automatic dimmer controls. That's not just on the public end. Springdale is a community of less than 600 people. Yana, I feel like, when you study some of this stuff, have you ever come across any of these conversion costs? And I guess, how does it even get configured? How do you even consider this from a legal standpoint? Isn't that the big problem with the cell, is these conversion costs?
When we're talking about costs involved in like lighting and lighting installations, in the end of the day, it becomes either way we can use it as an argument for legislation. Like, for example, when energy crisis started in 2022, there was a massive increase in, let's say, it's not truly light pollution regulation measures or norms or laws or whatsoever, but a lot of municipalities and actually national governments started to cut off lights just for energy saving, for cutting the costs. So it played a big role in that. Another point maybe is economic incentives to support this type of changes, which are neglected in the law. Because let's take one community in Madrid. Madrid is working very, very strongly in at least not really reduction of light pollution, but keeping it at this certain low level. And in Spain, there is no national law to reduce light pollution. So the community starts to think, why we're doing this? Because there is no law, they are not supported in anyhow to continue doing this work, to preserve the dark skies in nature or whatsoever. So in these terms, we could have used the help of economic incentives in law, I don't know what it can be, some discounts for electricity bills for these specific communities, or tax reductions or whatsoever we can think of with a few of the legal instruments and the connection with the costs involved in lighting.
Right. Those costs add up. I think that's really a major challenge. And honestly, if you overcome the costs, I think you'll get businesses on board. I think that's really the fear of a lot of businesses, is that, you guys crazy? It's going to cost another how much thousands of dollars to change over this lighting. We can't support that.
Yeah, I would echo Yana there. The first year we did the lighting switch off in Grafmere, which is quite a touristy town, it was probably about 20% of the businesses that switched off their display lights overnight, outdoor clothing shops, coffee shops, art galleries. But after the 2022, last year, 23, it was literally 85% of all the display lights went off in those communities. And as you say, that's what drives businesses. They don't care about the bats or the wildlife or the glare or the pedestrian. It's the bottom line, and that's what we need to nail.
Well put, Jack. Yeah, I like that. Well, let's take our final break right here. I have one more really intriguing article to finish up with. Before we get to that, guy, I wanted to remind you to head over to lightpollutionnews.com to see any of the articles from today's show. Don't forget, you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Reddit, and TikTok. And when you do, drop us a line. Say hello. We'd love to hear from you. If you aren't already subscribed to this show, why not simply subscribe right now? Once subscribed, you'll see Light Pollution News pop up each month when we release a new episode. And I want to circle back to you guys to see what cool things you guys have coming down the pipe. Jack, what's the next step for you in Cumbria? You had major success, right, with the big switch off? Like that was a unexpectedly good event this year, right? You had 3 communities, Lake District, Keswick, Ambleside, and Grasmere.
It's building momentum. There's more communities want to do it. The biggest problem is the technology. Some of those communities, the lighting, the street lighting's on a central management system, so it's quite easy and efficient to switch them off. But Keswick, for example, hasn't, so we had to have 4 lighting engineers overnight switch them off in the daytime and then switch them on the day after because we ran it in April, so there wasn't a great cost. But control systems are a powerful driver on that.
Right. There's no like centralized control for that town.
No, some of the wealthy, particularly the urban authorities, can do that. But I was talking to the lighting manager for the district, the authority where I'm based in the South Cumbria. But he actually said to me in a meeting just this last week, said, well, should we do Windermere as well, which is just a bigger town just to the south because it's on the CMS system. So I think when confidence is built, it will snowball. And as Yana said, once the electricity prices change, there's a lot more European cities switching the lights off overnight. We generally, as a standard rule, dim them by 50% at 9 o'clock till 6 in the morning. But we're increasingly moving to basically 100% dimming from midnight till 6, so they're going off. Okay. And that's to save energy and protect your biodiversity. And basically, there isn't any people on the street at that time of day in rural communities.
Right. Jack, where can people learn more about what you do and maybe connect with you out there?
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm based in a small sub-region. So if you go on the internet and put Dark Skies Cumbria, you'll be able to bring up. We've got lots of blogs of the proactive work we're doing, the festivals and the demonstration projects. But David and I work in a UK Dark Sky partnership. So there's websites related to that. We've got a chapter, Dark Sky International. We've got a UK chapter. They've got an evolving website. So we're basically approaching the light pollution agenda from multiple perspectives to try and build that groundswell of change that we need, as David suggested.
Yeah, and Yana, space law appears to be heating up right now. A lot of stuff. We'll have a story right after this about some stuff that would affect space law. I'm curious about how all that works. It's my impression that given the international aspects of space law, it's going to be very hard to have uniform governance. And I know you're trying to focus your studying space law. Is that right?
I mean, I do a lot of work all around the protection of dark skies. So when we talk about the space law aspect of it, like my PhD is focusing mainly on environmental law. So environmental bit of it and protection of the environment. But I work with International Astronomical Union, as we mentioned earlier. And there we're focusing more on how we can protect the dark skies for astronomy. And this is where actually international space law comes into play. How can it work? We have 5 international agreements on space. That's it. And we try to play around.
And these are old, right?
Yeah, they start from 1950s. And the last agreement was signed I think in the 80s or something. And it's all about, it has nothing to do with protection of dark and quiet skies. But here there is a big team of lawyers and other researchers, and we're trying to frame how the international space law in particular can play the role in protection of dark and quiet skies for astronomy, because we have Outer Space Treaty, which in its articles indicates that it basically protects the use and exploration of outer space. And we try to frame that ground-based astronomy is a form of use and exploration of outer space. So in this case, we can try to apply this space law, international and national also, space law framework to the issues of the dark and quiet skies for astronomy. But another point of it here, it's space law doesn't play on its own. We also look into international environmental law here and try to basically frame that space as an environment, as well as an environment on Earth, and whether it would be possible to, for example, use the precautionary principle or prevention principle, which we use when we talk about the protection of nature, right? Can we use it to the outer space? And in this case, can we reduce the impacts of the future satellites or the existing satellites? We can have another podcast just on that. I think it's very giant subject to talk about.
It's great to have these laws, these treaties out there, but if I'm going to start up my satellite constellation program, and I don't want to be burdened with any of this other, I just want to build giant satellites that, go up there and do communications or what have you. But I don't want to adhere to any of these, I can just go to like Russia, right? And launch all of my stuff up because Russia's probably not going to be part of any treaty, right?
They are part of every single treaty.
Well, right now they
except
are.
the moon exploration.
Right now they are.
No, they are from the beginning.
Yeah.
They're one of the funding countries of the Outer Space Treaty.
Right, but I'm just saying, like right now they are. I don't think that Russia. I was my armchair politician, so I can I don't think Russia would be part of any treaty that the U.S. would want. So,
I mean, there is a discussion going on. I mean, again, it's another podcast, but just long story short, there's a discussion about weaponizing outer space. And the thing is, Russia will not accept the American approach and vice versa, but they both want to mitigate the impacts and not to use the space for war. This is they just have different approaches which don't match, but it's not a dark and white sky discussion.
Yeah. I hope you're right on that. I don't know if both countries.
Yeah, I
don't know if either country really has ambitions for toning down weaponizing space.
David and I keeping quiet while the US and Russian bomb first battle it out.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll never know. We'll never know.
All right, David. So let's get you in here for. Is there a way people can reach you or learn more about what you do?
I think the best way to connect with me would be LinkedIn. Because I'm involved in so many projects, so it's very difficult to kind of indicate what is my main affiliation, because we recently, during the Spanish presidency of the European Council, we come up with a project which is Light Pollution Manifesto, and we drafted it together with David and another colleague of ours, and we're always seeking for support, this manifesto to be signed. So yeah, just follow up me on LinkedIn, and I always publish all the information we're working on.
Excellent. All right. David, moving on to you. Is there a corollary organization that we could direct people to, like Buglife here in the States?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a sister organization, the Xerxes Society, over on your side of the pond, doing basically they represent all the invertebrates in North America. They work internationally. We overlap in a few places. They've got some brilliant resources on fireflies, guidance on how you can help protect them and encourage them, where to see them and the like. And obviously that kind of spreads out to all of the other species that you've got there. So yeah, go and check out the Xerxes Society, and that'll do all of your needs on your side of the pond. Yeah,
we just actually got a grant from the Xerxes Society to put in some native wildflowers. So
brilliant.
Yeah, we put in some we have two, maybe three pollinator gardens we're putting in. And very much looking forward. Like you said, the impacts are supposed to be immediate. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing those impacts. It looks very fun. So where can people learn more about what you do and learn more about Buglife and anything? If they want to get involved or help out, how do people find out more?
Your easiest way is our website is pretty, I say it's straightforward to find. Search Buglife chuck that into Google. And then once you've found the Disney film and How to Watch a Blast and super engaged in insect life, you'll find us on buglife.org.uk. So on there, it covers all of the issues, all of the work that we do, and that's the best way. And on the social media channels as well. That's the best way to find out about what we have going on.
Okay, great. Let's finish up today's show with one last article from space.com, a company called Reflect Orbital. And I apologize in advance. I definitely want to issue a trigger warning on this, because if you're an astronomer or an amateur astronomer or in astrophotography, this is going to be ungodly depressing. So there's a company called Reflect Orbital, and it is planning to put up some mirrors to reflect sunlight down the solar farms. The plan is to put up 57 satellites that would add 30 minutes of additional sunshine to solar power plants. Now, before you crack open that window to your 37th floor condo building, the aim for this is to direct the sunlight back to the predetermined locations, for which former SpaceX employee Ben Nowak claims will make it look like a nighttime glow akin to, quote, some construction going on. I have no idea what the hell that means, but the light supposedly will be targeting directly solar power plants only. Yana, is there any application of this coming up? Do you guys have anything you're working on? And I'm sure this is something that has been bantered around. It's probably not a new idea, right?
This is very scary, I may say, because it's not the only project which is, maybe it's just in minds, maybe it's already under development. Another project is Project Solaris. is basically they want to put a giant solar panel also to the outer space to put the sunlight through the solar panel and then distribute it to us as a new renewable energy source. I mean, there are too many risks involved with this. As we see, these risks are not always considered, and we're talking not about only astronomy, which is obviously the biggest issue, and astronomers will face it the first. But I'm also talking. I'm not a physicist, right? But I think if we put these giant mirrors on our space, won't we increase global warming at a certain point? Won't we increase the light pollution, which is already there? So, we're currently with some lawyers, we actually working on an article to discuss risks associated with this project from the environmental law perspective. What type of environmental impact assessment should be done before giving the authorization of such kind of projects? Because obviously, solar panel, renewables, it's all good. But even on the ground, they have their impacts which were not considered before being installed. And I think everything what people try to introduce brings additional impacts, and we have to try reduce which we already have. I'm against increased space exploration without the proper risk assessment, and we are lacking of international space law, which I mentioned just earlier, and without it, or we have to build a stronger connection with environmental protection, treaties or obligations. Otherwise, if we will allow everybody to send this type of satellites or solar panels, what we're going to do after? So it pisses me off. I'm working on an article on it. So.
I mean, there's a couple of ways you can look at it, right? The engineering solution is, from a technological side, it's pretty inventive. It's pretty interesting that you're able to actually do this, right? On the other end, we've seen this story before with communication satellites. Is it only going to get bigger? Is the first generation going to be smaller? And then before you know it, this thing's going to be the size of, a regulation football field or something. Where does this lead to, right?
Increased space debris, increased space traffic, and there are a lot of, also the problem with the positioning. All of it. What we're going to do when it's not working? Where is it going to go? Are they going to go back to Earth? International Space Station, I'm going to the space field now, but the problem with International Space Station is very old, and it has to be decommissioned back on Earth, and they're planning to do it to the ocean. By doing that, we're increasing so many environmental impacts. The project itself is really good, but there are a lot of problems associated with it. How do we distribute the energy around? If it's only owned by only one company, all the money will go to one company. We're creating kind of monopoly on our solar space energy. So, it's difficult.
It's all right.
For me.
I'm sure anyone who's into astronomy.
I know I'm a simple creature, Bill, but can we not make frugality sexy? Can we not focus on conserving energy, not continually growing our demand for absorbing, using more energy?
Jack, AI and LEDs need that energy. Come on now. It sounds pretty terrifying to me. I wonder. I mean, like you said, Yana, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Maybe we should think about things beforehand. But there's this culture, and especially in the tech side, where you just kind of throw it out there and then damn the torpedoes and figure it out along the way. And if you need to fix it, you fix it after the fact, or you create these nice, ecologies like Facebook, which nothing bad ever happens on social media. So
toxic environments.
I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you guys, all of you guys, for being such great guests today. And thank you for all the work you guys do. Soon to be Dr. Yana Yakushina, Mr. David Smith, and Mr. Jack Ellerby. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys spending 2 hours of your life here on Light Pollution News. I want to thank you guys on that. As a reminder, Light Pollution News was recorded second to last Sunday of the month. I'm sorry, usually we're last Sunday of the month, but second to last this month due to Memorial Day. The holiday is coming up here in the States. You can find all the details in this show over at lightpollutionnews.com. If you have any thoughts, questions, just want to say hi, feel free to text us in that link in the show notes. Once more, I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, thanking you for listening. And remember to shine the light only where it's needed. Thank you for listening to another episode of Light Pollution News. What a show that was, right? Well, here's the poll I promised you at the very end of the show. Do you think that charging renewable energy at night is a net positive for society, despite environmental or other externalities, costs that may be incurred? You can text yes or no from the link that you see in our show notes. Just open up your podcast player, and there should be a link at the very top that says text here or something along that line. Probably be a little more descriptive, but you can text yes or no right over to the show. Thank you.